most of it favorable.
Now, Frank Schaeffer, you supported John McCain in 2000, as you write.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned my book, Crazy for God, how I grew up as one of the elect and helped found the religious right and lived to take all or almost all of it back. And really, people who have read that book will know that I come from an evangelical family that was really evangelical royalty in the 70s and 80s. My father was a frequent guest in the Reagan, Bush, and also even the Ford White House, Bush first, that is. And my background, therefore, was very unthinkingly Republican. We were always just associated with these folks. And so in 2000, I was actually on a number of evangelical and right-wing stations, like with Ollie North, for instance, on his radio station, pleading the cause of John McCain, who I thought would be a much better candidate than George W. Bush. But really, over the years, distancing myself from that evangelical background, as I talk about in the book, I've come to a place where I really see what Max Blumenthal was talking about in the earlier part of your show. And that is, you know, speaking of secessionists in Alaska, the evangelical right-wing subculture in this country, particularly the Assemblies of God, by the way, that Sarah Palin comes from, have really already seceded from our union in the sense of the fact that they have, you know, between homeschooling and their own schools, their own publishing, their own radio, their own TV, many times very fundamentally anti-American, waiting for the apocalypse, waiting for Jesus to take everybody away in the rapture, weirdly Christian Zionist, and at the same time assuming that the Jews will all be killed in Armageddon when Jesus comes back as part of their rapture enterprise. You know, just to put it frankly, the evangelical movement that I grew up in as a child used to be a fairly respectable and respectful group of people. They regarded themselves as Americans and part of the system. And now I really think it's been taken over by a group of people that have to be described fairly as just wingnuts. And if you read Crazy for God, you're going to find through my own journey coming out of the 50s and 60s that I watched all this change. I mean, you know, I preached from Jerry Falwell's pulpit. He sent a jet up to get me once. You know, I know Pat Robertson and Dr. Dobson and all these people personally. And the fact of the matter is the whole movement's gone off the rails. And the dangerous thing about Sarah Palin is that there's a very direct line from her to the kind of extremism that would literally destroy this country. So, you know, when you look at what 8 years of George Bush has done to our economy on one side, when you look at the war we're in Iraq, and by the way, my son was in the Marine Corps and fought twice in Afghanistan, took one mission to Iraq, one to the Horn of Africa. So I speak of someone who, as someone whose son actually was out there getting shot at because of these policies. When you look at all this, as I talk about in the book, what you see is that we really are at a crossroads here. This election is not just an election. This election is a mirror that is being held up to the United States saying you can choose what sort of country you want to be. Do you want to be with the Sarah Palin wingnuts who are bearing high-powered rifles in their gardens for the time when the United Nations sends Black Hawk helicopter-type missions against America? You know, do you want to assume that Jesus will be coming back to rapture everybody, so you hope there's an atheist co-pilot in every plane? I know this sounds laughable, but there are tens of millions of Americans who are buying into this crap. Or do you want to be a member of the United States of America, Republican, Democrat, left, right, center, but part of the American family? Or have you already seceded from our union? So basically, I think what this election's about, and what my book is certainly about, is besides the politics, besides whether we have Barack Obama or John McCain as our president, is also another kind of a choice. And that is, are we going to give the right-wing evangelical / fundamentalist wingnuts of all stripes, of the Sarah Palin types, a voice in literally destroying this democracy? Do we want another 8 years like the 8 years that have passed, double, triple, and go from there? So, you know, my problem with McCain now is that by nominating Sarah Palin, and as I talked about in this editorial, by opening the floodgates of hate because of his ambition to win, basically doing whatever it takes to do that, he's clearly choosing to try to empower the America that will destroy the real America. And when I say the real America, I mean people who are proud of their country. So we've come to a very weird place. We have Sarah Palin, who talks about Barack Obama not liking his country enough. Her husband and her are associated with secessionists. So we have someone who wants to run for vice president who doesn't even want the Union to hang together, who would have fought on the other side in the Civil War, as it were. when it comes to the states. You know, going up against Barack Obama, who I personally think would make a terrific president.
Frank Schaeffer, I want to just come in here on that, because it's very significant, your endorsement of Barack Obama, considering where you come from and your own beliefs. I mean, your father was a famous evangelical preacher, person who gave sermons around the world. Really, you convinced him to take up the anti-abortion line, to make it central to his philosophy and your own. So here you are, anti-choice, pro-life, and pro-Obama. Senator Obama, who is fiercely pro-choice. Right. And you know what? It's an imperfect world, but I'd rather have a president that I disagree with on the issue of choice, who's fit to be president, than an old man who has just shown such a lack of judgment as to literally connect himself to the lunatic fringe of the lunatic fringe. It isn't just someone you disagree with politically. That's one point. And I'd say something else about the choice issue. I am pro-life. I haven't changed in that regard. If people read my book, Crazy for God, they'll see that I've gone left, if you want to put it that way, in many, many areas, but not that one. But I actually believe that if your interest is not ideology, and ideological purity, but rather abortion itself, i.e., do you want more or less abortions, that the medical and social programs that Barack Obama is talking about for our country in terms of care of women and children and families, improvement in education and possibilities for all Americans, actually will result in less abortions. So my interest in the abortion issue is that I think abortion is a tragedy. My interest is not the politics of it, as in always appearing to vote for the person who has the correct ideology. And so I think there's a choice for Americans interested in this issue who are, like me, pro-life, and that is you want to choose ideological purity attached to a party that will so destroy our economy and all the social programs that there will be more abortions, i.e., as there have been through the Republican-controlled years when they've been talking about this issue for 30 years and done nothing about it for actually helping women and children? Or would you rather have a president like Barack Obama who you disagree with on this one ideological point in terms of what you might call the theology of the issue, but whose program would practically result in a more conducive environment for families to prosper, for people to have children, for kids to go to school, for women to be taken care of? And I would rather vote for a person who's going to do the job rather than just have the correct ideology. Frank Schaeffer, also on this point of terror and terrorists, you make a very interesting point. I was reading your book throughout yesterday and last night. Thank you. About your dad and about being invited to the White House by President Reagan, by President Bush Sr., by President Ford. And you talked about him calling for the violent overthrow of the United States, yet still being invited to the White House.
Yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy is total. Again, it goes back to what Max Blumenthal was saying. And by the way, I totally commend him. I hope everybody goes to his website and looks at this. This is a huge and underreported story he was talking about, and he is getting to the nub of it. So well done, Max Blumenthal. But people who read Crazy for God will come to see that what I decided was happening was that the people who were talking from the right were actually about patriotism and wrapping themselves in the flag were actually, in a weird way, profoundly anti-American. They wanted disaster. The worse the country got, the closer it was to Christ coming back. The more you needed Christians to tell you to accept Jesus as your Savior. You know, they needed an apocalyptic
We have
frame
8
of mind.
seconds.
Yeah. So essentially, yeah, I would just say, you know, my point is there was a hypocrisy because the anti-Americanism was very much in the right, while the right was talking about and pointing the finger at the left.
Well, Frank Schaeffer, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Film director, former evangelical Christian, latest book, Crazy for God, How I Grew Up as One of the Elect, helped found the religious right and lived to take all or almost all of it back. He has written an open letter to John McCain. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, investigative journalist Bob Perry. Stay with us.